Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is Max and Stacy Report. Remember, when you're accessorizing your Bitcoin wardrobe, you fashionistas out there, try to coordinate your orange Bitcoin grenade with your shoes. That's generally a good rule of thumb. Hi, Stacy.
Max, I want to talk about something that happened in the past 2 weeks in El Salvador and how the president responded to it, which gave me a metaphor and an analogy, a way of looking at the world, what we have seen for the past 40 years. So for the past 40 years, we've had a bond bull market. Interest rates have been going down, down, down. And this has encouraged in this all fiat global dollar system since 1971, what it has encouraged is high time preference, because you could always throw your bad debts into the future. You could always roll over your debt and have some next generation, somebody not yet born, pay the cost for it. So when we had some floods here with a tropical storm Bonnie in El Salvador, what was found was that some manufacturers of clothing dye, they poured a bunch of toxic waste into the river. And what the president had tweeted about it was he said that they consider us their garbage dump, like their dumping ground. And the thing that stood out, and you could see the video there of the water all red and toxic, is that you and I, the week before, had spent the day in Apopa under a bridge which connects the San Francisco and Los Angeles communities with a bunch of young people who were cleaning up the trash in the river, along the riverbanks, that had been deposited over the previous 40 years by that same generation with the high time preference, where you could always throw your trash, whether it's your trash economics, your trash financial products, or your trash, literally your trash, into the environment, into the economy of the next generation. So here's a little clip just so you see, like, look at these young people cleaning up that same exact river system. It's not the same exact river or stream there, but close by, is that here they are cleaning up. And a week later, some boomers throw trash, toxic waste into that same river that these young people, who are the future, had spent cleaning.
Come on, boomers. Stop being disgusting pigs. Yeah, it's terrible. And the new generation coming up, they have to work extra hard to make any progress, because you still have the boomers that have that old mentality, as you say, whether it's throwing toxic risk into the marketplace with bonds that are now collapsing, or actually throwing real garbage into the rivers, which is another form of pollution. It's all pollution, and the boomers essentially thrive on pollution. Now, this new generation, this Bitcoin generation here in El Salvador, they understand the pristine collateral that is Bitcoin, and they reject the idea of fouling the environment for a quick penny. They understand the long-term value of it and its relationship to their overall well-being. And I think that the tide is turning. The rivers are flowing differently, and the Bitcoin ethos is permeating.
It doesn't even matter if it has happened yet. What will happen is that Bitcoin does that to you. You and I have been in Bitcoin for 11 years, and it slowly happened over that time, that the time preference lowers. And what that means is that you start to value the time, like that you price in the future, right? Instead of high time preference, where you don't give any value to time, you just like consume as fast as possible. And in fact, what bonds and interest rates declining for 40 years has done is that you think that you can get away with having no cost. Like, you could steal the future. You could steal the time and the value and the work of the future. Like, what our system of fiat fraud meets ever declining interest rates and intervention by the central banks has allowed a generation to plunder the future. And that changed their mindset. That lowered their morals. Whereas what Bitcoin will do, and by the way, Bitcoin came at the right time. It came at 2009 during a financial crisis, when the worst of this plunder began, when the money printing ratcheted up. And it doesn't even matter. Like, that system is over. That system of plunder, and where you could just keep on rolling over all your risk, all your debt, all your toxins, all your waste into the future and stealing from the future, that was over anyway. Luckily, we have Bitcoin that was invented and birthed in 2009.
Right. Why do you hold on to your Bitcoin? Because you understand that it has future value and it can't be inflated away by the money printers. And when I talk to people here in El Salvador and they have maybe 10 or 15 or $20 on their Chivo wallet, they're quite proud of it. They're like, I'm saving this for the future because I know in the future the purchasing power of Bitcoin will be where it is or greater, no doubt much greater. Whereas the fiat money world, they just dump all their toxic sludge into the river. They spend it right now on trinkets and garbage, and they have fiat lives, and they live fiat lives, and they're going to die fiat lives in a fiat grave, singing songs of fiat misery. We won't begrudge their departing. They are no longer welcome here. The entire fiat generation, be gone.
Well, it was the structure and the incentive model of that system that caused that. The baby boomers became the greediest generation and the most selfish generation because of the money system under which they operated. So once the US went off the gold standard in 1971, it was all fiat, and they could think that there was no cost, that they could get free lunch, that they could have free energy, abundant free energy, that they could defer costs, that they could dump their costs onto future generations, because it did seem like it worked for 50 years. It kept working, right? House prices kept going up. Your job kept getting better. And you had to work less and less. Literally, nobody works in America anymore, but they're never been wealthier. They say, right? The Fed says you've never been wealthier because your house price is at all-time highs. You don't have to work. So it seemed like it worked, but what it was doing was it was degrading your morals and the entire system, not just the environment, as we saw in that video, when it's treated as a dumping ground. The future is treated as a dumping ground in a fiat system. In a proof of stake system, it is always going to be a dumping ground, simply because those with the most wealth, those who control the flow of that river of money, they get the money first. That's what the Cantillon effect is, by the way. The Cantillon effect is what we see around the world, is that those who are closest to the source of new money, which is the New York Fed, in America, that's the source of free money, and then say the European Central Bank or the Bank of Japan, but the cleanest, freshest, pristine, fresh water of money comes from the New York Fed. They get it for free, and then by the time it rolls out to not only future generations, but other parts of the world, whether it's Latin America or Asia or Sri Lanka or Africa, it's filled with toxic waste of risk, of bad debts, of bad economics, of no work, no labor, and sloth.
Right. Paper money has a lot of problems in terms of it being inflated away, the purchasing power being destroyed, and the Cantillon an air effect, as you described it. Gold, because it's traded by weight, it has some advantages over fiat money, because somebody can say, this is an ounce of gold. I can weigh it, and it's an ounce, and I know it's an ounce. But of course, over history, there's been problems with fake gold, and it's got costs associated with it in transporting and insuring the gold. Then Bitcoin comes around, and it's a whole new paradigm. It's validated by itself through the work of encryption and mathematics that's perfect and confiscatable behind an unpenetrable wall of encryption, which is superior to gold and obviously superior to fiat. So it appeals to the psyche, and appeals to the emotion, and it appeals to the human wellness that would be incumbent on us as humans, as part of nature. And this is why this generation is so excited to be part of it. I'm staring into space because I'm channeling the words of Satoshi himself. I am the bishop of Bitcoin. I am Satoshi's representative here on Earth. If you see me staring into space, it's because I'm actually chanting the thoughts and words of Satoshi.
But I also wanted to point out that one word that you didn't mention there was trustless. Bitcoin is trustless. You don't need a trusted intermediary like you do in the fiat system, and that is what enables the fraud. As we mentioned in the previous episode, Bastiat has proved and pointed out long ago in 1850 that man, by nature, we seek to plunder. We'd rather plunder than have to work hard out in the fields and build wealth, right? So that is the point about Bitcoin is it's trustless. Gold is not trustless because you need to trust that whoever is selling you that is not selling you a bar of tungsten. They're not trading you tungsten for your cow. And you need a lot of equipment to trust that. Bitcoin, you don't need to do that. The settlement is the trust.
It perfectly said. It solves for trust. The trust is built in, and the settlement is in the transaction. So that removes that's what's great about El Salvador. They don't have to go around checking everybody's bag to make sure they got the right fiat or the gold bar. It's already in the system. The president can do other stuff, and he's doing other stuff.
And of course, the president doesn't need to, or any commerce here, merchants here, they don't need to worry about doing global trade. This is what happened with Renaissance Florence, for example, is that they became so wealthy because other merchants in North Africa that the guys from Florence would go trade with, they trusted that the florin was the best of all the money. So they would rather trade with a guy from Florence than a guy from Milan. So that's how they became wealthier. So here the same thing is if the merchant in China or Japan or Nigeria knows that you're going to pay him in Bitcoin, he knows that he's going to get paid. He doesn't need to wait for you to find some US dollars, which right now are in short supply, like places like Laos, places like Sri Lanka have no US dollars. So there's no way for them to trade. Well, you don't need to worry about that with Bitcoin. So that's the point about that I was bringing up in terms of why Bitcoin restores trust and just makes, again, in terms of treating the future or treating the now like the dumping ground, that's over. That's over on a Bitcoin standard, and that's what was so shocking about looking at a river system which we helped clean up with some young people, the future, the week before, and then the past of fiat fraud and toxic waste being dumped into our financial system, into our economies, into our culture, into our environment. It all came so clear looking at that.
Yep, heartbreaking. Hopefully some lessons were learned.
Well, I do want to point out that on top of this, you can't print watts. And that's a good point to close on this first half, Max. And that is Germany discovering in real time that you can print euros, but you cannot print watts. And as you see from the price chart, Max, it is a soaring price of energy as they print euros and decide to shut down, again, the source of life, the source of liberty, the source of property, and that is energy. So you can't have any of that without energy. And they've decided to have sanctions. They've decided that they're going to shut down their nuclear, that they're going to shut down their natural gas, that they don't need energy, and that this magical world where they can print up euros, it's just going to cure everything. But what they're finding is that, in fact, they do in fact need energy because it is not magical money. It is not magically created. You actually have to work for it and prove that you have it.
Yeah, exactly. Keynesian economics doesn't work. No, it doesn't. And they're finding it out in Germany in real time. Oh, it's cold in here. Hey, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to Max and Stacy Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Adam O., who mines Bitcoin off flare gas at Upstream Data. He's a fossil fuel maximalist. Adam, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I think this is the second time we've talked, so glad to be back, and glad you guys have a new show. This is awesome. I caught the first episode. It was good stuff. So glad to see who you guys bring in the future.
Yeah, that's excellent. We love it. Now, tell us about a little bit about mining Bitcoin off flare gas, what that means for the future of both Bitcoin mining and energy and environment policy.
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't want to go on too long of a diatribe here, but in short, the Bitcoin network, in my opinion, its killer application is the fact that it's a downstream energy consumption market, right? Or it's autonomous energy demand, where for the first time in history you can sell energy to this autonomous network, and you don't need a buyer, right? So there's nobody buying your electricity or buying the energy that you're producing. It was programmed 13 years ago to give you Bitcoin for that energy today. And so that's a really disruptive thing in the world of energy, to be able to sell energy without a buyer. And so what we do at Upstream Data, we're I would say primarily an oil and gas company more than we are a Bitcoin company, but we're an oil and gas company that helps oil and gas producers leverage the Bitcoin network, right? We educate them, we provide them with the infrastructure, we provide them with engines, with portable data centers to then leverage the Bitcoin network, interact with it, and participate in mining the network, so then they can effectively sell their natural gas that they otherwise weren't able to bring to market. And the reasons for that are a lot of the time simply economics, right? Where the well is located out in the middle of nowhere. There's no pipeline infrastructure, and you can't truck gas to market, right? It's not economic to do that. And so if you don't have a pipeline, and you're producing crude oil, well, then you typically just burn the gas off. And it's kind of a waste or a byproduct called associated gas. It may not be a lot, but oftentimes it's enough to power enough computers that the economics all of a sudden are very attractive, where now you're selling your gas to Bitcoin and maybe selling your oil to, the local population.
All righty, super. Let's talk European energy prices are going parabolic. This catastrophe seems entirely self-made, part green policies, part sanctions. What are your thoughts on what's happening, and how would Bitcoin fix it?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. So let me put it this way. When you say it's part policy, I'd say that it's majority policy. One thing the government does really well when it enters a market is it creates deadweight loss, right? It creates inefficiencies and deadweight loss results. And what we're finding right now, I finished recently watching a documentary called Burned, and it's a documentary shining light on the deception and ultimately the fraud that's taking place in this quote unquote, ESG world, where entrepreneurs have taken advantage of what is called an accounting loophole, or the accounting anomaly in carbon accounting, which is when you burn biomass, which is wood, right? They're supposed to account for the biomass when they harvest the trees, when they harvest the actual forest. And therefore, they don't double account for the biomass once they bring it to an incinerator and burn it for electricity. However, because of the fact that they're harvesting wood in the United States and shipping it to Europe, I don't know if you know this, a lot of Europe's energy right now, they've decommissioned all their coal plants and replaced it with what they call biomass, right? Carbon net zero biomass facilities, which they're really not net zero, because the carbon that comes out of the stack when you're burning wood is about 40 or 60% more carbon dioxide per megawatt hour than if you're burning coal. And so there's actually an increase in this, it's a more inefficient process of generating electricity, more costly. And it's kind of counterproductive to this whole concept of carbon, net zero carbon emissions. And so I'd say that it's twofold, but the biggest punch is the first punch, which is there's been regulatory incentives to put in place inferior and less economic sources of energy and power. And they've been strangling fossil fuel industry, right? They've been penalizing the fossil fuel industry for powering the world, right? At the end of the day, petrochemicals, oil and gas really make the world go round. We couldn't be having this Zoom call if it wasn't for petrochemicals, if it wasn't for oil and gas. And so, I think that the regulations kind of hunting down the oil and gas industry is significant, but I don't know if it's as significant as the ridiculous incentives and subsidization that's taken place on these other, inferior forms of generating power, which has put us in a position where, put Europe in a position where they're so reliant upon gas from Russia that they're now begging people to fire up new coal plants. That they're looking at letting the coal plants come back up online because they're going to have a really brutal winter. So what Bitcoin does is it shatters all of the regulation, right? What happens is, if you look at a supply demand curve and you enter in government intervention, what you have is, like I said before, you either have a shortage or you have a surplus and you have dead weight loss. Well, Bitcoin's going to break through all that noise, because anywhere in the world right now that somebody is generating, producing energy or generating power, if they feel like they're not getting a good deal for their efforts, if they feel like they're getting a bad market rate, well, then they're just going to export that energy to Bitcoin. They're going to stop sending that natural gas down the pipeline. They're going to stop, putting that electricity down the power line to your house, and they're going to start just powering computers and getting a better price for it by mining Bitcoin. And it's going to be the great equalizer across the globe, where anywhere there's cheap energy, Bitcoin miners are going to show up and find equilibrium. And anywhere energy is overpriced, people will flee and they'll relocate. So we're in the middle of a really big energy shakeup. This is somewhat unprecedented even in history.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Now, what about this trend toward sanctioning energy-rich nations like Russia, Iran, Venezuela? Does this hasten the demise of the U.S. dollar, at least as an international settlements layer? Because is it even possible to separate the reserve currency from energy pricing and survive? That's a great and complex question. We put it this way. It is likely going to be a catalyst to the petrodollar's demise. Right, I just said it. Where think of Venezuela or Iran; those are great examples. The U.S. has been sanctioning those countries and their energy production, which is their primary resource. Right, other than human capital and labor capital, they pretty much have energy resources. And so, when the United States comes in and says, "Hey, you can only sell this much oil per day on the global stage," and in order to settle energy on the global stage, you have to deal with the U.S. dollar. The United States effectively controls their economy. Venezuela or Iran can wake up and say, well, yeah, like the United States is limiting how much we can go sell on the open market, on the global market, but we can take a bunch of our energy and we can just mine Bitcoin with it. And that's an immutable process. The United States cannot stop them from doing that, short of, coming in and dismantling the infrastructure that they're doing that with, short of bombing them. They can't sanction that process. So just as much as Bitcoin is an immutable means to transfer value, peer to peer, Bitcoin is an immutable way to sell energy. It's an immutable way to sell electricity. It's an open and free energy market. So any attempts to try to sanction these nations it's futile, right? Ultimately, they'll figure out they can export as much energy as they want to the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin will take it all. Now it will pay a diminishing amount, right? If you put 4 times the amount of hash power on the network that's there today, on the margin, your dollars might not be great, but nobody can stop you from doing that. And so pretty soon what we're going to see is the complete and utter circumventing of sanctions, right? Sanctions are futile. And that will edge nation states into Bitcoin, because if they can trade their energy for Bitcoin, well, then if they can trade their Bitcoin on the global stage with their allies for goods and services, well, now they just took their natural resources, their oil and natural gas, they turned it into Bitcoin, they turned that into goods and services, and they never entered the US dollar. They never touched a dollar and completely circumvented the sanctions. And so it's a big problem for the US. It's a big tool for any countries that are feeling the grip of the US. And again, it's disrupting energy markets from the individual all the way up to the nation state. How does Bitcoin fix the stability of a nation's energy grid? Use the example of El Salvador, and what could Bitcoin mining do for it? I would say it kind of does the same thing, the same incentive benefits all power grids, whether it's El Salvador or whether it's Chicago, in my opinion, and it's overproduction of energy, right? What Bitcoin is going to incentivize humans to do is overproduce electricity, overproduce energy.
even more so than we're incentivized to do today. If you think about it just on a really basic scale, look at, the globe, the world as a single market, and you say, okay, well, how much energy demand is there on planet Earth? And in 2008, 2009, there was X amount. Well, today there's X amount plus the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network is this brand new, like I said, it's an autonomous buyer of energy. It buys X, right? Today it's about what, 20 million or $17 million worth of Bitcoin is released to miners every day. So about $17 million of power is bought by the Bitcoin network every day. And people are going to provide that. And so as Bitcoin increases in price, as in my opinion, that market will grow, and as it has grown over time, what we'll find is it makes sense now to overproduce. It makes sense to, even though this town only needs 2 megawatts of power, it makes sense to put a 4 megawatt power plant, 6 megawatt power plant, and push the rest to Bitcoin. And then the town has the ability to expand, and the price ought to be really cheap. It ought to be really close to whatever Bitcoin is offering for the electricity, because that's going to be the arbitration tool. And so in El Salvador, it's going to, El Salvador is feeling it right now. Like they've already tasted some of the sweet rewards of mining Bitcoin, right? Of taking that geothermal energy that they have from their volcanoes, turning it into electricity. Well, to always have a buyer for that electricity is something you can count on. That's something that allows you to plan better as a country. That allows you to say, hey, in the future, we can count on at least X amount of revenue. Everyone's going to want to overproduce at this point. And ultimately the consumer should win, right? Human civilization should flourish, because when we have access to cheap and abundant power, we're able to have great research and development, and birthing rates go up, quality of life goes up. So it's a good thing for everyone, but ultimately we need to produce more energy. Bitcoin is the reason we'll do it.
Now, Adam, you call yourself a fossil fuel maximalist, but you're not against using whichever stranded energy resources are available. In fact, things like hydro or geothermal are often the most stranded of all energy resources. What does Bitcoin do for stranded energy? How can it transform the global economy as we know it?
Bitcoin rescues all stranded energy. There's almost no such thing as stranded energy anymore. That's something I said early on was, I think in the oil and gas world, they have this term called unmarketable gas that doesn't have a market. And I've been arguing since 2018 that term is going to need to be rewritten, right? That's like what gas, like laws and property rights are built on. Oftentimes this unmarketable aspect. Well, there's no such thing as unmarketable gas anymore, because we have Bitcoin. And so what it's going to do for stranded energy resources, like you said, hydroelectric, and certainly intermittent power generation sources like wind and solar, most of those processes are very inefficient, right? Wind and solar, either the sun's shining when people aren't demanding, or the wind's blowing, people aren't demanding, those kinds of things. So these peak and trough demand cycles coinciding with the fluctuation in power generation, it's really tough to plan for as an investor. If I'm going to invest in a wind farm, if I'm going to invest in a solar plant, I have to try to account for the demand side of the equation. And now that I've got Bitcoin, it just makes it so much easier for me to plan. It's so much more attractive as an investment, right? And so we're going to see the opportunities open up where anywhere in the world right now where a community is left in a previous century where they don't have access to electricity, there's an opportunity to go provide them, to go be that producer of power, right? To bring them into the 21st century. And even though that's a decade or multi-decade long process, it never really could happen before. It's the chicken and the egg problem where, if you go there and you provide a bunch of electricity, well, they don't have any appliances to consume the electricity. They don't have the grid. And so you can go there and you can, build a solar farm or a wind farm or tap into a natural gas reserve or a hydroelectric facility, and you can mine Bitcoin. You can justify the economics of that investment on the interim. And then you can, over time, build up this community and bring them into the present day, right? Allow them to leverage technology. And then you'll see things like clean water, right? It's really hard to have clean water when you don't have electricity. Weirdly enough, like it almost comes before clean water. You can have, a lot of times you can have sanitization if you have abundant electricity, if you have abundant power. You can get food. You can grow in greenhouses and things if you have that base tool, that base miracle that really enables all of modern day life, which is electricity. And so it's Bitcoin is just that carrot, right? Bitcoin is the incentive. Very smart people. I spend my days working with some of the smartest people in the oil and gas space, right? Geologists, petrochemicists, chemical engineers. And the fact that these people are understanding Bitcoin, they're going to lay in bed at night and their brain's going to race about, hey, where can I go generate power just a little bit more economic, on a little bit more economic basis than the next guy, or where can I go take advantage of an opportunity? Because anywhere right now where you can successfully generate power economically on the margin, you can get rich by mining Bitcoin, right? There's a direct financial incentive. So these human beings will be led to change the world because they're going to be rewarded in this sound money that you and I both know is going to appreciate. You know it better than I do. You've been around a little bit longer. You've seen a lot more commas come into the equation, but it's going to be the thing that I think it's going to steal a lot of people from the tech industry. I think they're going to come and start working on energy projects. You can already see it with a lot of the guys that have moved out of Northern California to, go find some destitute coal mine in Pennsylvania that they can turn into an awesome Bitcoin mine. And so, there's stranded power and stranded energy everywhere. Bitcoin's just going to, incentivize everyone to do it.
All right, Adam O. Thanks for being on Max and Stacy Report.
Hey, absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, that's going to do it for this edition of Max and Stacy Report. Want to thank our special guest, Adam O., coming to you from El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin. Until next time, bye, y'all.